patience as we concluded one set of meetings and segued into the next. But at this point, we'll commence the informational session on the part of the council and the administration to discuss Mishawaka municipal utility-related issues, and in particular, the electric department. So, Alex, the floor is yours. If you wouldn't mind, in case we do have some folks participating remotely, if you'd identify yourself, and then we'll be happy to listen to your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. Yes, my name is Alex Hilt. I'm a director with Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors. I've been working with the city and the utilities in particular for a number of years now. What we are here talking about tonight is the 2021 analysis of the electric rates, and mostly in regard to both the final I&M true-up that was received this summer after the conclusion of the supply contract through I&M and AEP at the middle of 2020. And what we'll really get into was the changes in transmission charges from the PJM network that began this year, that really came out of left field. I don't think there's any other way. We're just going to jump into that. What I have here on the screen and what you have in the presentation in front of you is a look at those total PJM interconnection charges, and what they've been doing over the last decade, with particular interest in basically the last year. We saw a dramatic increase from PJM for those charges. These are calculated basically kind of a year on a year lag. They're based on the total peak of the city, the peak power of the city in relation to the rest of the kind of service area that you're a part of, so the greater AEP electric service area. And it kind of goes on a cycle of whether they pick the day that they determine the peak on in the summer or the winter. The last 2 years, what we've had is a summer peak, and that has always had a pretty significant impact on Mishawaka. You have a very heavy residential base, which leads to significantly more summertime usage because a lot of your peak usage is based on cooling and air conditioning running versus necessarily a heavy industrial user that is going to have relatively steady demand throughout the entire year, regardless of the time of year. So, one of the things is that when the PJM market switches to a summer peak, it has always caused significant fluctuations in our PJM pass-through. But this year was particularly strong, and what we've been doing is trying to run down and talk to a lot of other people to figure out if we can get some more information as to what was, is there something else driving this? Is there some kind of additional explanation we can get beyond, beyond you had a pretty normal year in 2020 and maybe some other areas within this transmission zone saw a lot more negative impacts and shutdown versus what the city of Mishawaka did. But at this point, we've mostly not found too much that really is the smoking gun for why we saw this 80% increase in these rates, whereas other people were looking at 30 or 40% increases. The other piece of what will always flow through this annual look at the electric rates, what always has and really won't into the future, is that the I&M true-up, we had a 6-month, still had the last 6 months of that to go through the true-up process, and that came in June at $1.5 million. which, again, was another bit of a surprise given that that is in line with what you've paid for your true up for an entire year for, a number of years. But this was only covering the last 6-month period that you were part of that I&M agreement. So we really had this confluence of bad news that were the things that, we really didn't have control over. They were the ones that were always the wild card that, through all of the work in getting the Wolverine contract, what we have seen is a significant reduction in the overall power bill. But now, because of this last kind of the third leg of the stool are these transmission charges, and those are the things that, we were not able to make any kind of long-term contract for. Those are set every year by the PJM market operator. So, the benefits did start to come in immediately from the Wolverine contract, but now that that last rate piece that we don't really have the control over has grown so significantly, we're back at the point where we need to take significant actions on the electric rates and to, do something now as we're approaching the next phase of the base rate reductions, which are set to take effect in January. Because these changes, as you can see on the next slide here, they have basically erased a lot of those savings that we were experiencing early on. And, we're coming back up to something that is approaching the level of total cost that the utility was paying even before the change in provider. What used to be a relatively minor piece of the overall bill, kind of that green section, was those transmission charges. 2 years ago was around $6 million of your, your $45–50 million total bill. Now it's making up $15 million of your $30 million bill. So it's, it's a much bigger player in the overall scheme of things, and is going to remain the one thing that we have to, always take a look at every year.
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yep.
So this PJM, who owns PJM? And were they the transmission provider before? And
Yes.
they were the transmission provider before.
Yes.
So if we were with, who were we with before? I&M?
Mm-hmm.
If we were with I&M, would we still have a $14 million bill?
Yes. So the transmission charges have always been basically a pass-through, have been an extra thing tacked onto your bill regardless of what, regardless of your provider. The PJM operates the transmission grid, so they're the ones in charge of making sure the power actually gets from where it is generated to where it
Correct.
needs to be used.
I understand. I kind of understand that. What a racket. I just don't, I guess, if we don't understand why it's $14 million now instead of $8 million, how could we say, yes, let's pay, you know what I mean? I don't understand why you can't explain to us why Mishawaka has a $14 million bill. And from what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, but from what I'm hearing, communities around us have not experienced an 80% increase. So, and you can't explain, and I'm not blaming you, but if PJM can't explain to us why that's occurring, how can we explain to the community why this happened?
And before you answer, that's not just Kate's question, that's my question as well, and I suspect the others as well. I don't mean to get you off track here,
I'm sorry.
but I don't understand how we got to I'm still not processing how we got to this point, and it's hard for me to move forward with the rest of your presentation until I understand what's driving this enhanced charge. And it sounds like you don't have the answer. No criticism of you, but you don't have the answer at this point.
I mean, I don't have a direct a direct answer for why
Well-
what you experienced.
At the risk of being rude, I think we're going to need a direct answer why before this process can move much further down the road. I agree with Mrs. Volker. It is virtually impossible for us to explain to the ratepayers and the community what's going on here if we don't have the answer ourselves.
Or we don't understand it.
And we don't understand it. So that's a foundational piece that I think we're really going to have to firm up. Maybe that will take place during the course of this proceeding, but either tonight or in the future, the answer to that question, why, is going to have to be firmed up.
There had to be something, did they upgrade their grid, their equipment? Did they?
So that has been a big piece of it, that, that is why everyone has seen, significant increases in their transmission charges, because, they have been making a lot of investment in.
And again, I don't want to interrupt, but if that's an equivalent factor, that constant ought to be at play in the rates that other communities are playing as well, or am I missing something here?
Yeah, well, and, part of this is, the best explanation that we've been able to get to this point is that, these rates are based on a peak in 2020, and that year is anything but a normal year. So,
And perhaps you'll need to flesh that out then. I guess it's hard for me to understand why the usage in Mishawaka would be so dramatically different than other communities.
and, what I've assumed, what I've kind of landed on in going through all of this is that the usage in Mishawaka, really didn't change, is part of why the problem is. And there are other places that are within this AEP zone that, essentially they have a total revenue requirement number that they are going to collect from everyone within their zone. And then, that is more or less divided up based on who has the biggest peaks when they do, their calculations. So while there may not have been anything in Mishawaka that significantly changed in the summer of 2020, if there were other players within the AEP zone, which stretches, all the way up to Lake Michigan and over into the middle of Michigan, around Sturgis and thereabouts, if there were significant changes from players that are normally a much higher peak within this zone, that is how the rates flow down to more disproportionately affect Mishawaka.
So, I'm sorry. So did everybody in this region experience an 80% increase?
I mean, I do not know what some of the other players
I mean,
in
did
this
South Bend,
region.
I mean, so
My-
if we're in a zone and somebody else fluctuated more in that zone and we're being penalized, that doesn't make sense unless everybody in that zone is experiencing an 80% increase.
And-
I need to see like the numbers, how this happened.
And I would agree with Mrs. Volker. Unless there is, I think it would be helpful to us to see that community by community comparison within that zone. And my assumption would be that if other communities aren't experiencing an equivalent increase, it's got to be driven by at least one of two things. That the process here takes a snapshot at a particular time where we had the unfortunate bad luck to have our snapshot look worse than other communities. Or I'm forced to wonder whether the change that we made from AEP to Wolverine is a related factor here.
That certainly was something that we had a lot of discussions about, because optically the timing of this seemed very, very suspect.
Yeah, it's just suspicious, isn't it, that it all comes together
Yeah,
under this time frame.
Does AEP own PJM and they're going to get their blood somehow?
They don't, but, we are dealing with the AEP transmission sector. All of the costs and how all of these allocations are done for PJM are all run through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, through FERC. So what they, they are the ones that approve, kind of essentially through the state agencies, they are the ones that approve what grid providers like PJM or MISO are able to charge. And what IMDA has done in the past and what the city of Mishawaka is still doing now is working with engineers that review all of the filings that are done with FERC to see if you can find, issues or inconsistencies with how AEP has allocated their costs or, what they've been approved to do. And, at that point, they didn't really find anything for 2020. They're in the process of doing that review for the next year's filing. And, it is a very detailed and, very specific process where they're asking for a lot of the line-by-line details of what goes into AEP's filing with FERC that ultimately become part of these rates that are passed down to you. But, the result really is that, this $14 million, assuming nothing else changed, would have still come through whether you were part of AEP or Wolverine. The way they do the transmission, the transmission calculations have nothing to do with who you're buying your electricity from. They look at the physical flow of that electricity and what makes the most sense.
Alex,
Yep.
based on what Greg said, if you go back and you pull together what these other communities are looking at, and we're at 80% or 78%, whatever it shakes out to be, and let's say they're at 32%, what's our recourse? Do we just have to lay back and take it, or what the hell can we do?
I mean, at this point, the biggest thing that we can do is what you're already doing in continuing to try and review AEP's filings with FERC to make sure that, we're trying to keep them as honest as possible in what they are getting approval for. I think I mentioned in my email to you, Greg, that, for the most part, there's been very little pushback against transmission operators because, it has been made apparently, very clear, particularly through, the events in California and the wildfires that have been caused by transmission lines that, when you don't invest in your system and do not maintain it, there can be very dire consequences.
And I know I'm repeating myself, and it's not just because I'm rapidly aging. But that would make more sense to me if it was a universal and everybody was subject to that same trend. But if in fact we're the outlier, that begs some additional questions. And I can't in good conscience move forward until that question is better answered.
Mm-hmm.
Also.
Not this evening, but at some point in time.
Also, you said that pass-through for I&M was $1.5 million last year for the whole year.
Mm-hmm. For
This year,
6
you're
months.
saying it's $1.5 million for 6 months.
Yes.
By changing carriers, did we tick them off? And they just passed another $1.5 million to us? I mean, can you answer that? Why?
Again, it all flows through the formula rate that the city was a part of. And so as long as how they've calculated their formula is in line with how
I
it's
think we
been
need to
done
know
in the past.
how they calculated that formula.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, $1.5 million is ridiculous. Just all would come up double for what we paid for a whole year.
Yeah, it was $2 million in 2020 and $1.5 million for 6 months in
Yeah.
2021.
Thank you, and I strongly share the concerns of my colleagues here, and if I could ask you again, I think I heard you say it, was this pass-through or this proposal approved by the regulatory committee?
Yes,
It has?
I mean,
For 2020, and it's...
the
there's-
charges that you would see and that you have been seeing this year have flown through FERC.
And pardon my ignorance regarding this regulatory committee, but is there an appeal process, or you know, like, to follow up on Mr. Belovich's question,
Yep.
you know, I think it's extremely unfair if we would just sit back and take this and not fight it. Is there an appeal process, or to go to the board or the regulatory committee?
Yeah, so we've had some discussions about that. Obviously the first one is, looking at next year's filing to, again, make sure that, they, as a whole, we agree with everything that AEP has put in, with GDS is working on now. The only other kind of recommendation that we've got from talking to people is, having discussions with the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission about, about their piece in this, in this puzzle, and, pushing them to essentially be more critical of the transmission providers, and really, taking a fine-tooth comb to what is being approved for them, and, how these things are flowing through, because ultimately it does seem to flow through the IURC.
And even though we left the IURC, we'll still be,
Yeah, I mean, even without being an IURC member, obviously we still have a vested interest in the outcome of this. So, it is something that they can look at. The other piece is that, as a member entity, there are processes through PJM to get involved, get more involved in their annual rate setting process, that I don't know that has been particularly high on anyone's list as of late, but could be something that that we investigate. Again, for trying to get more clarification on exactly how we ended up in this situation, because it has certainly been a significantly more marked impact to Mishawaka than what we would expect to see, just looking at the overall picture of where revenue requirements are going for the transmission.
sure. And I can almost guarantee 9 people would like to know, including some folks here in the audience, for those answers. So I appreciate it, and I look forward to getting some information shortly.
I am so sorry that we got you off track with your agenda. You were humming along really well. We started peppering you with questions. So is there something else that you want to address right now, or would you prefer to go back to your PowerPoint and try to work through that?
Pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily have, too much else to say as far as the general PowerPoint is concerned. What we are facing now is with the next 7% reduction in base rates coming up, we have kind of two things will happen. In the end of December, at least by January, we will know what next year's transmission rates are going to be and what our monthly bill is going to look like in regards to that. And unless there's a dramatic reversal indicating that this giant peak was in fact related to, was directly related to pandemic weirdness, unless that completely changes, we are going to be in, significantly dire cash flow position for the electric utility if nothing changes and we continue on with getting pass-through bills, transmission bills like this.
Can you summarize what the downside is for the utility and for the community if we end up in that dire cash flow situation?
Yeah, I mean, so what has happened already, we've gotten to this point without being in terrible shape, because this year was designed to be a year to build up cash reserves in order to make those significant capital investments over the next 5 or 10 years in the distribution system upgrade. Now, because we had that built in, that's allowed the electric utility to kind of absorb these higher purchase power costs than were anticipated, without running the risk of running out of cash. But if we layer on the 7% reduction in base rates that will start next year and keep the costs at levels that they are now, we would not be able to make really any capital investments next year and would already be in, significant negative cash flow territory within the next 2 years.
And I think I know the answer to this question, but if we didn't make those significant capital investments, my assumption would be that it denigrates the reliability of our system here locally, correct?
Yes.
What other potential downsides would there be? And that may be a better question for Kevin, but other than lacking the ability to reinvest in our system the way that we'd want to, what else would be the downside for the community?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to dive into that, you can, but, I think this puts, aside from the funds that the electric utility has from the bond issue for addressing the distribution system, it really puts a halt in that upgrade to the 12 kV system.
So we could still spend the bond proceeds, but the other things that had been planned to do to reinvest in our operation potentially wouldn't be able to be done without an additional source of revenue. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Can I ask a follow-up? Oh, I'm sorry, Maggie, I've been.
Mrs.
talking
DeMaid.
before.
Do you know what transmission company also works within Indiana? I'm showing the map of PJM, which stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland.
Yeah.
So they're all covered. The upper part of Illinois is covered. The lower northwestern area of Michigan is covered. And then it looks just like underneath the border, there we are. We're the only, who else works within Indiana?
MISO is the other major regional transmission provider.
And is there any way that we could look into them?
Not really. I mean, the way the zones are broken out, it's all done geographically based on who the provider is, and
Yeah, it looks like little gerrymandering to
I mean,
me.
yeah, those providers would then essentially choose to be part of the PJM or the MISO network. So, that piece of it is not necessarily something that we have any control over. It's purely based on the geography of where you're at.
Okay.
May I ask a follow-up question? Not about the network, but I'm kind of interested in that. Wondering if we're being penalized because we're the only one in Indiana, if that puts extra pressure on them. But my question is, so how fast do we have to make this decision? In other words, I would really like to have answers to these questions. I don't want to put, our electric utility in dire financial straits. You said that in January, we'll know what our bill is for
You'll have
2022. So
Yes.
why are we rushing in to pay, to up the rates to pay for $14 million when we don't know what they're going to be?
Yeah, so this was more to, we wanted to start this discussion and make you aware of what is out there. We certainly can take action now and get something in place and recalculate things in January. Or, what we've come to from looking at it is, we don't need to do anything this year, but we certainly would want to be taking action in conjunction with the rate changes that are going to happen.
Once we know what
in
they are.
January.
So we really don't know what action we need to take until we know what those upcoming rates are. Am I correct? Am I misunderstanding? I think I'm misunderstanding a lot, but
Yeah, so, the other thing that, that can happen now is that we can go to doing this calculation every January, essentially. We had always waited until the summer to get what the true-up was going to be through I&M.
and I thought we were going to get away from true-up.
We are, and we're done with
Just
that.
changing the name It's just something
Well,
you
this,
named.
this has always been part of the pass-through process. The transmission rates have always been included in that. Again, they were always a much smaller portion of the overall bill because your rates through I&M, those rates were much higher, but obviously this piece was much smaller. So that was always recovered through this true-up. But now we don't have to wait until June to really know what the hit is going to be from I&M anymore. So, we can be more flexible and take action in January in order to, set things up for the coming year instead of sitting on it for 6 months, knowing that, we could get a $1, $2, $3 million bill from I&M that would have to be, built into this too. So, this is a shot of where things are at. If we want to put something in place to correct, start collecting what has been lost throughout this year, this is where the calculation comes out to. It really just undoes the 7% reduction that, that is going to occur.
And would that be the sum total, that it would revert back to the level prior to the 7% reduction, or in one of your addition? That's the slide I guess I was looking at.
So, with this, current 700 kilowatt hour family, a single family home would be looking at, just under a $75 rate. With our rates that are starting in 2022 and the ECA, the pass-through as we have, as we have calculated here, they would be at just under $76. So, it basically keeps the rates the same as they are now, instead of being able to realize that 7% reduction, the changes in transmission would take up essentially all of that.
And this is undoubtedly a problem on my end, but, so you're comparing column 1 with column 3? What about column, help me understand, 2021 with,
Yeah, so
So 21
the $81 would be if you took action right now, and
Okay.
they went into effect,
Thank
it went into effect for essentially December billings at this point.
okay.
You would have an $81 bill that would then drop to $76, starting in January when the new rates take effect.
If we weren't confronted with this issue, what would that $74.70 figure have dropped to in 2022 without this issue rearing its ugly head?
It would have been just about $6.50 lower, so just under $70 would be the total bill without the transmission issues.
So to go back to my question then, in column 3, the just under $76, is that returning to where we would have been without the 7% projected savings?
I know, I'm confused.
Or is it more than that?
It,
And if I'm asking a bad question, I'll try to rephrase it. So, going into 2022, the anticipation was that the ratepayer was going to realize a 7% savings. With what we have in front of us, would the projected 2022 figure go beyond that 7% coming back on the bill and being a higher amount?
yes, it would be.
Can you quantify that for us?
Is that the 89?
So,
But I'm looking for a percentage. If I was gonna see a 7% decrease, now what's the projected increase that I'm
Gotcha.
looking at?
I would have to look at.
And if you don't have those numbers
what that
handy,
would be. I mean, it's less than $1 overall change in like a residential bill, but I don't have the percentage of what that would be. I mean, it's going to be
and I feel a little bit better seeing the dollar impact, that puts it in a different context. But if you could do the math, not right now in real time, but if you could help, that would be helpful to me to know what that is gonna, so I had anticipated a 7% decrease. Now I'm looking at
it's going to be like a 0.5% or thereabouts.
7.5, maybe 8% compared to what I anticipated. Or is that 8% on top of that 7%? You understand my question? We told, when we
Yeah.
engaged in this process earlier, we communicated to the community that they could anticipate a 7% decrease in their
Yep,
rates for electric, correct?
yes.
So, compared to that 7% increase or decrease, what are they looking at for 2022 if this preliminary recommendation is enacted? And that-
Yeah, so essentially, instead of a 7% decrease, they would have about a 0.5% increase.
Okay.
Yeah, the rates are more or less going to stay where they're at in
Status quo.
2021 instead of reducing again in 2022. You know, they still have the 7% reduction that we did see in 2021, but you know, this kind of takes up that additional decrease that we had planned for 2022 because of the dramatic changes in the transmission charges.
A quick question, this may be, Becky may be able to answer this, but, you know, with the American Rescue Plan funds, would we be able to utilize any of those funds to offset any of this increase?
If we could determine that it was COVID related, that's what I see from the definition.
Right, and it seems to be that,
I mean, yeah.
I don't know if you could draw the lines
If
in
we could
that,
get
but-
somebody to commit to that as being the reason, then, you know, then maybe, but yeah, as far as the utility uses that are allowed, electric utilities are not specifically spelled out in the things that, you know, that you're allowed to spend direct funds on.
I mean, I share Mr. Higsonball's sentiments where, you know, we had led the public to believe that they could anticipate a 7% increase, and then it's like, or decrease, and, you know, let's pump the brakes here. Not only are you not gonna get that decrease, but you're gonna get that 7%, you're not gonna get that 7% decrease, and then you're gonna get an additional.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly is not the discussion that any of us wanted to be having. You know, we had built in higher than average inflation numbers in where we thought transmission rates were gonna go, because we have, you know, 10 years of history of them going up 5 or 10% a year. So, you know, that's what we had built in. And you would have been, you know, in perfectly good shape to be able to handle that, and we'd still have our
and I
7%.
think that's where most of our concern is, this anomaly that of, you know, you've gone back 10 years, and it seems to be that we are subject to such a large increase compared to our neighboring communities, you know, and not to beat the dead horse, but, you know, we need to know why we are so much higher than our neighboring communities.
Right. May I ask a question?
Please.
I'm sorry. I don't understand this map, or this thing. Graph.
Okay.
Could you walk through it
Yep.
with me? And also, I don't know what ECH means.
The ECA is the
AA, sorry.
energy cost adjustment, or, you know, that is the kind of acronym we're using for this pass-through. So the first column, those are your current rates, you know, what a traditional residential household is paying under the 2021 rates. You know, that second column, you know, those are the same rates, the same base charge and energy charges, and just have that $6.45 ECA charge added on. So, you know, if we had taken action on this immediately, you know, you would have December bills that are $6 higher.
And you would propose actually adding a line item that says ECA, and have that $6.45 listed on the bill?
Well, Becky, I don't know how your bill actually, if it does break it out, but, I mean, they're always, you know, it is a separate appendix. This pass-through has always been a separate appendix in your rate ordinance. And, you know, in the past, when we have had it, you know, we haven't had it since we reset reset all of the rates in 2020, but when it has been there has been a separate, well, I
Okay.
don't know if it's a separate line on the bill, but it has gone into the bill calculation.
Oh, understand that. I was just curious about how you were going to explain it. Go ahead then.
I don't know that, if it hasn't been done that way in the past, I'm not sure that. I actually think.
So you could explain it,
Might
but,
be.
or what is it, right?
Yes.
And we did also have a PJM or a pass-through on there before some of the restructuring here, but we have had it in the past.
Right, no,
It's nothing new, these pass-through charges. Trust me, it's been the vein of the origin of my frustration in dealing with electric for a long time.
right.
Even when I was on the council, we dealt with the tracker and our citizens, our ratepayers' frustration with it. We went to more of a pass-through that was done more annually, every 6 months kind of a thing. Then when we went over to this, now, we didn't foresee this.
No, I know
We couldn't
that.
have predicted it. We based our projections on trending, and this is what we have. I'm as frustrated as you are. This is what we owe, and we're a little nonprofit, electric utility, our ratepayers. And this is not, even though it may seem unique around here, you look around the country, and there is a lot of this kind of thing going on in the electric utility, so.
And I think that will be helpful to us as much as is possible. We're not going to be able to gather community by community across the country. The more that we can put this in the context of it's not just a Mishawaka issue, but it's
Telling a story.
played out on a broader landscape.
How do you tell the story?
Without that, it's going to be impossible to tell the story, or at least have a story that we can understand as we're having conversations in the community. So, and none of this, gentlemen, is finger pointing or criticism of you, Alex, or anybody else. But if the mayor's frustrated, we're all frustrated by this. And frustration's one thing, but lack of understanding and being able to encapsulate it in a nugget that you can share with others. I will be unable to explain this to my wife when I go home tonight. And this is the first time I remember coming out of a meeting like this and feel that way. Now, I may be able to work through that as we're through the process, but I don't feel like I can explain this right now. It may be me and everybody else is tracking it, but I don't feel like I can explain it.
Well, I'll tell you too, when we first found out the news about this, we're as frustrated.
Yes.
And we want to know why, and we want to know why it's different here than everywhere else. We are trying to find those answers out.
I believe it.
But the bill has come, and so that's where we are. We can't absorb that kind of bill.
Undoubtedly, we have to deal with the issue while we're trying to get to the nut of the problem. I would agree with that. But the more that we can try to, throughout this process, firm up our understanding of it, I think we're all going to feel better about that. Looks like Mr. Prince wants to step to the podium.
I
and-
can't shut up. I just can't shut up. I can't keep my
I
mouth.
told you were grouchy about having to be here.
Yeah, well, no, I'm not grouchy about having to be here. It's the subject matter that, the frustration, that's what's running through my head right now. As the mayor indicated, when we first encountered this, we were angry. I mean, it was going beyond, and now, in terms of digging down, we've done our due diligence in terms of working with Wolverine. We had a meeting with 20 people around the table trying to better understand this issue. We have professional consultants who are looking into specific charges, asking for information from PJM, from AEP regarding the improvements that were done. We're trying to get our hands around all of it. And to explain it, I think, is we don't have all the answers. I mean, that's really it. I mean, I think as the mayor hit the nail on the head, is we're not going to have the answers. It's going to take months, and I equate it very much to the way the taxes are calculated for your house. That's how I would explain it to your wife. So there was a sale in your neighborhood next door to you. When your assessment was calculated, your house was worth $300,000, and that assessment next door came in at $450,000. And then suddenly, because they took that one day during the pandemic, in the summer, when most of our consumers are on the residential side, caused our peak to be exceptionally high. And you combine that with everything else, and we don't know if it's going to come down or if it's an anomaly, as Alex said, or if it's going to come down. So that's part of our frustration. But the reality is, and why we're here before you, and why we wanted to talk about this a month ago, was we don't want to jerk around our ratepayers either regarding having a drop come January 1 and then immediately coming back to them, because there's a potential, and I hate to bring this up, but there's a potential that not only was this right, but it could go up again. So, and having it drop by 7% and then having it immediately go up is part of our concern in addition to the cash flow. We want to be as transparent as possible, and we've talked very much, and I think you've been one of the largest advocates for this, is we'd much rather see smaller increases over time than we were, and that was the issue the mayor represented with the tracker, that things were going way up and then went way down, and nobody could track what we're doing. So we're very sensitive to that, and that's why we brought the issue. Obviously, this is your, I hate to say it, but, you know, the rate's got to go through you. So at the end of the day, it's the council's prerogative on what we do, but that's why we've taken the time and why Baker Tilly is here tonight and why we've presented it to you in this fashion. We don't have answers. We're working through the answers, but that, when I equated it to a house, the tax bill is due, the assessment. We can appeal. There's not a very good appeal process. That's another part of the frustration. It's not like the taxes on your house, but the mayor is very good about going downstate and yelling and screaming. And if ultimately, at the end of the day, we don't get the answers, I think that's exactly what we do in terms of the Utility Regulatory Commission going down and saying, we don't have answers and we deserve answers. But right now, we just don't have the information where we can even intelligently do that, other than, if you can imagine, you need that backup information before you make a case and you go down and scream. You just can't go down and, at least in my world, you need actual evidence, you need an understanding before you would make that case.
And I agree with you. And it sounds like that there was some validity to one of the questions that I posed earlier, that there is at least a chance that some of this is the unfortunate scenario of a snapshot having been taken at a moment in time where it was not advantageous to us as a community for that to be that.
But the real answer is we don't know. Yes, that's a
We don't know,
definitive
but that's at least an
possibility.
open
Yes.
question at this point in
Yes.
time. The other thing I would say is that I agree that ultimately the buck stops with this body, but this feels to me like even more so an issue where we're in it together.
Oh,
And that-
definitively, yeah.
I'm sure we all appreciate the information that you've shared to this point in time, but I think it's incumbent upon the administration to continue to partner with us to try to firm up the answers to some of these questions. Admittedly, you've already done that, and going back to your meeting with all the people around the table, you've been frustrated by this much longer than we. But as this process plays out, what other additional information you can provide to us, it will be helpful. And I continue to be fixated on this comparison piece with the other communities. And it may be that that is related to the snapshot in time.
But I'm not the expert in this. I've sat in the meetings, but at the end of the day, I equate it back to the house. We got the house that sold next door that the assessor is now looking at
Yeah.
and saying our house is worth this much more. The other ones have gone up and have gone up significantly, but we got the bad comparison.
Well, it's my understanding too that they're based on peaks. That's when that snapshot happens. Our peak happened to be in the summer, when there are times when our peak is taken in the winter, where we don't have near the draws.
By peak, do you mean measurement?
Yes.
Okay.
I can give you some numbers. Okay, well, some of you don't know me, so Kevin Wasmer, the Mishawaka Electric Division Manager, just took over in June, so I'm trying to get my head going on all this stuff here, but to kind of help explain some of those, especially the 60 to 70% numbers that we're quoting. So the average, from what everybody was talking about, was a 30% across the board for everyone on the PGM, kind of was in the communities that you're talking about that they saw. We had an actual 46.5% increase in our peak demand. We're we're the second largest utility in the state of Indiana.
I'm sorry, what
And
was that?
So we have the highest, well, we have the second highest right now.
What
There's
was
been-
the increase?
The increase was
demand?
46.5%. So in 2020, which our rates were being paid on, we had a peak of 91.8 megawatts. So that's called a winter peak. That's usually our smallest peak. So at the smaller peak, it was 91 megawatts times $219.42 a day. Okay, then they times that by 31, and that comes out to your multiplier. So when they did the increase to the transmission rate, PGM rate itself, it went from $219 to $261. Okay, so that was the 19.5% increase that everybody's talking about they got. I think what happened, like you're talking about the snapshot in time, would be, we had that increase of 20%, and then we also had an increase because it was a summer peak. Our peak went from a 91 multiplier to 134 megawatt. So if you take the 134 megawatt plus the additional 19.5%, you're looking at a 50, 60, 64.5% increase from the original rate. So if that kind of helps break it down why it looks like it's so high. So when you're talking the other communities, like New Carlisle and that, they were all in around the 20%, I think 25% rate. So we were at 19.5 if you go by the megawatt charge per day. That's the actual breakout fee. But when you throw in the fact that we had a 46.5% increase because it was a summer peak, that's why our rate went up. That's why it feels like a 60% increase when it really was.
And just like you drew the or made the comparison with the other communities, do we have that 46% comparison to show how that number for us would be different from the other communities?
I do not have their peak.
Yeah,
So
and-
we'd have to see what theirs were. I would venture to say I would doubt it'd be that high because the utilities are at 1/3 our size.
That's the thing. We are
We're
a
over-
unique utility. There are not many like us. In fact, there are none our size like us.
So it's a function of the size of our operation as well, and the pull.
Maybe the age too,
But
which is what we're updating
Okay.
right now. We're at a 4 kV system in a lot of our areas. We're going to 12, which should help with the peaks.
And we may be chasing a ghost here and unable to ever get to the ultimate truth with regard to what's driving this, but the more that we have, and even what Kevin went through, I could see that being reduced to a slide for comparison purposes. That data feels to me like it would be helpful to try to quantify so that as we're explaining to the community, that's another piece of the presentation with regard to how we got there.
Right, and there's kind of a pattern with it too. The pattern's usually like summer, winter. So I think when you look at the 20-25-year history, you'll see it just goes up and down. They just tend to do a summer in a row, which is your higher peaks, and then you dip down, we get a winter peak off of it. So what happened was when the rates were all, I wasn't part of the study in the beginning, unfortunately, but from what I gather, the rates were done on the lower because it was a winter peak. So now we're in the summer. Next year's predicted to be a summer. This is coming from Wolverine, who we purchase power from now. So with it being predicted to be a summer peak, looking at where we're at, we're probably going to be close to 132 as far as our megawatt usage. So if the price per megawatt stays the same at the 261, we'll be close to the same $6 million deficit we have this year going into next year. But it's not predicted to be a winter peak. That's about the only thing you can get from when you look at the PJM website and that, whether it's going to be a summer or a winter peak. So that's like,
And that's just arbitrary? They just say, oh, flip a coin, and this year it's going to be summer, and next year it's going to be winter? Or how, if we were already summer, winter, then it's because we changed providers, so we just got we're unlucky, and we get summer.
no, that's why I was saying it's always a summer, winter. If you look at, say, it's 3 in a row, I don't think I've ever seen a winter in a row. I mean, if you look at it, if you pull our history up, I don't know if that's just a standard that PJM does. I don't know off the top of my head what that answer is. But if you look at the history, that's how it kind of works. So,
I think it'd be good to see that graphically.
If we could do fall, that would be great, but anyway.
fall, winter would be fantastic. You keep us under.
First,
90.
I'd like to thank everybody for sharing your frustration. It sure helps myself, and I'm assuming that my colleagues as well, and for fighting the fight behind closed doors and that we weren't aware of. But if, just kind of to do the Cliff Notes version, can you confirm or deny the statement I'm about to make? This is not a rate increase, this is a cost pass-through.
Correct.
This is not our utility department, our city saying, we are increasing your rates from here to
Right.
here. This is a
Correct.
pass-through. We're passing through the rate increase from the generator.
Right, the base rate has dropped this year. It stays dropped. The base rate is supposed to drop next year. It stays. It's just that we have to add a pass-through fee, a tracker,
Right.
on a much bigger scale.
Right.
Is what it is.
And the last bar on the slide that we had up there, taking us to 8912, that's if we would not have gone to Wolverine and if we would have stayed with I&M.
Yeah, so that's essentially
Thank
the
you.
best estimate that I can do at this point. This was based on our last rates with I&M, so the base rate piece of that would have changed too. But you would have been at least looking at $90 rates if we had done nothing, and this PJM spike would have come anyway.
If there's any comfort you can take from it, this could have been much worse if we had stayed with with I&M. This transmission rate was coming, whether we're with Wolverine, whether with AEP, and it came, and I'm glad we're with Wolverine because our ratepayers won't have to absorb an even higher utility bill.
So, just to understand this graph, since you brought it up again.
Yep.
So the 75, so it was supposed to be, the rate was supposed to be about $70, and now what you're proposing is that we add the $6.45 on, and the rate will be $75.91 for this scenario.
For 2022.
For
Yep,
2022.
The third graph would be what the rates would be with those new 2022 base
And if I
rates.
can piggyback on that, it would be helpful to me if you would add a column in between that shows what it was projected to go down to
Right.
Without the,
without this additional pass-through being added in, just so that it helps me capture some of the numbers.
sure.
Well, we need to call it something different than the tracker.
We don't call it that anymore.
I tried to stay
We
away
weren't
from
supposed
that
to
word.
have it.
Yeah.
I've heard that's a bad word around.
Well done. Kevin, and by the way, if we're looking for things that have changed, it doesn't escape my attention that Kevin's new to this, so if we're looking for a fall guy, I think we've got a ready-made candidate.
Yeah.
Call it baptism by electric.
That's fine. Yeah, I kind of fell into it, but that's fine, part of the job, so.
But as our friend Mr. Prince was good enough to remind us, ultimately the buck stops here. And, stick with me for this hypothetical for a couple seconds here. So if it was the pleasure of the council not to take action to get us to that minimal 0.5% increase, 7% savings goes away, we're going to have to increase 0.5% to pass this charge through to you, hypothetically. Then would it be possible for you now, or, after you had a chance to collect your thoughts, to identify for us what that would do to our day-to-day operations? If we didn't do this, what would be the downside to the community and to the integrity of our system if we didn't pass this through?
Well, right now, today there wouldn't be a downside. But today I'm gonna say we're on borrowed time.
Okay.
Because we're using the bond money right now to do the infrastructure upgrade, concentrating right now on the Union substation and 4th Street, which is all downtown Mishawaka. So basically south of the river, Church Street, all the new businesses, everything that's happening right now, that's the main focus of that bond money. I believe as of this month, we're almost halfway through that. And we haven't really started everything downtown yet with the transformers. So I would predict within about a year and a half, we'll be through the full $10 million on the bond money. That being said, if the rates don't change, we stay where we're at, our cash flow stays even, which means we just stay even, which would give us repairs, maintenance of day-to-day stuff. The 4 kV system and all the equipment has been projected to not be built probably in the next 15 to 20 years. And right now, the lead time is 3 times, before COVID, it was 3 times longer than a normal 12 kV system. So that's why we just started the project saying, hey, we need to upgrade the system. So what I'm saying is we would be upgrading and maintaining stuff that breaks. So then we would be reactive instead of proactive. And then you would have probably large areas without power longer than the 2-hour standard that Mishawaka residents have.
And that's what I'm
That's where I
looking
don't want to see it go. But that would be probably the long term if we can't get something done on this side.
We're on borrowed time with our 4 kV system.
And that's not a place that any of us want to go, myself included, but I think it's important for that to be part of the narrative as well. Folks, if we don't do this, this is what we're looking at as a real-world implication of that. So the more information that you can give us to flush out those type of things, it's not a threat, but it's the reality that, correct? That if we don't have the capital to be able to invest in a stable, reliable system, there will be a downside that the community realizes.
Yep, that is correct.
Well, the other part of upgrading to 12 kV, unlike other infrastructure that we invest in, whether it's sewer, roads, whatever, we put in the investment, typically, from that point on, it starts to deteriorate. With our electric grid, when we invest into it, it does provide value for us. It shaves off some of those peaks. It's a much more efficient system, and it's able to have more certainty in kind of how we, you explain it better than me, but it's supposed to
Reliability?
shave off the peaks. Well, handle peaks and valleys
So
differently.
rather than the spread being here, it reduces
Right,
it
it's
to,
kind of like your bandwidth on something,
Yeah.
right? So we're going to take the bandwidth and make it tight. So we're going to bring it into a window about this big. Right now with 4 kV, it's 3 times that of 12 kV. Okay, so your amperage and stuff. So everything, the bandwidth kind of bounces like this over time throughout the day. So going to the 12 kV system, you have a stronger bandwidth, which means your voltage doesn't spike as much. It's the same kilowatts. So whether we're doing 12 kV, the house is still using 700 kilowatts, doesn't matter on that side. But what matters on our end is how much it costs to get us there, right? So how much it takes to pump it there. So if we're getting it up real high like this, it's cost us a high demand. So if we go to the 12 kV, we have higher voltage, has a lower amperage pushing out, so we get a tighter bit bandwidth, and we could lower, I don't have percentages, but we would lower the overall peak. That's the main goal pushing forward.
and to me, that's another persuasive point, if that could be reduced to a bullet point that's going to be part of what we share in the future, I think that also would be helpful. Good luck with reducing that to a bullet point, but you're good at what you do.
Yeah.
What's the thought with hydroelectric power? I know it's expensive to operate or to get it up and going, but,
So we purchase power wholesale from the market, we cannot generate
okay.
by contract.
Correct. So other ideas so our main goal would be obviously to lower our peak, not just with the 12 kV, 4 kV conversion project. That's just one small step of it. The other ones we've got a few ideas that we're going to be looking into, which is capacitor studies. Putting better capacitor systems out on all the system does the same thing, lowers that bandwidth, gets it nice and tight, even if it is 4 kV or 12 kV. Those studies cost money, but that's part of what we're doing moving forward because you can't change everything so quickly. This could be, capacitor study could be something we could probably do in 2 to 3 years versus 10 to 15 years of changing each substation out. So it's kind of like something to do in addition to changing substations out to help us out. And then there's also a brand new technology that's out. It's called Flexgen battery storage. There's one in Fort Wayne right now going up, being installed. And it basically takes all your energy, stores it into like a substation, but it's all battery operated. And then that storage is added to the supply during the peak time of the day to help shave your peaks. So there's a lot of new stuff out there, technology. Now that's going to cost a lot of money. Obviously, it's not a very inexpensive way to do it, but those are some ideas we're looking at too as well.
Tony?
I just want to say one thing, or maybe a couple. I have a hard time looking at this and not believing that AEP's behind the curtain pulling some strings. And I would hope, and I think you guys are doing it, that we pursue that to make sure that that's not happening to us. And I don't know how we do that, if we go down to the regulatory commissions or whoever, but I guess that's the policeman in me. When coincidence is not, it's not always coincidence.
No.
So, yeah.
Correct. So currently, we hired GDS, who is also an engineering consultant firm, along with 5 other utilities. And that's what they're doing right now. They've done one request, which was not fulfilled. So they did a second request just recently for all the data collected from AEP to justify their transmission costs and calculations and formulas. So we have not received that yet. I was hoping to have that. Would have been great to have it, but the first request they did not respond to, so they've done a formal second request for the information. So, as we get the information, we'll share it, obviously, but I was hoping to have more of that data with us, but we did not get it. But that is part of what we're talking
Thank
about.
you.
They're trying to look
Appreciate
into it,
that.
so.
And we can't state definitively whether that's happened or not, but I can tell you they've become tougher to work with on other matters since, we've gone in a different direction.
Yeah, I was debating on whether to even say that publicly, because I know we can't, but it just seems awful funny that we can do this. And the way I understand this, PJM it's like a commission that oversees the transmission? there's
Essentially,
no-
yeah. The PJM themselves don't actually own.
They're like
any-
non-for-profit, that's what it said.
Essentially,
Yeah,
yes.
they're non-for-profit.
They're
So they
just
oversee
kind of the
this.
overseer.
But
that-
there's certain utilities that belong to that,
Mhm.
and probably their biggest one is AEP, from what I read,
Yeah.
in,
In our
that's-
area,
yeah,
correct.
in our area.
Like I said, they're
And
going
I
to
do.
let some. I just want to ask, sorry, my millionth question of the day. So are you asking us to pass? It's not a rate increase. We don't want to identify it as a rate increase, right? We want to identify it as a pass-through cost. is my thought, but are you asking us, does this have to be done before the end of the year, or do we have time to wait till January to understand I'm asking an honest question from a financial standpoint, and, what are you asking? And when do you need us to do it?
Yeah, so, I think kind of the drop dead, we need to be doing something is going to be January, when the new base rates come into effect. We've gotten through, I guess that's kind of what I was showing up here, we've gotten through this year with basically maintaining cash balances where they're at, but with that new base rate change, and if nothing else changes, we start going through $6+ million of cash every single year, from here on out. So that is unsustainable for, frankly, any amount of time. What has been done in the past is, we've always brought these pass-through things to council. The way the statutes are, they are a standardized calculation. They can just be done and automatically put into place, but Mishawaka has always brought it to council to make you aware of it and to get your approval to put it into effect. But you're correct, it is not a general rate case, or, a rate adjustment. It does not have to go through, the two meetings and a public hearing that normal rate adjustments do go through, because there is, it is basically a standardized exception as part of Indiana code that you can do these periodic, purely wholesale cost-based adjustments through a more simplified process, because when you're in a period of rapidly adjusting rates, you need to be able to address them without needing to spend months on it, but,
Thank you.
This sounds like it needs to be done as soon as possible, but the thing I would like to see us have is, if possible, a single sheet of paper for talking purposes, and we've all got the same sheet, and we're all saying the same thing. Because we're gonna have to explain it. There's no question about that.
I would agree with that, and I would anticipate that we're going to have at least one non-council meeting opportunity for some additional public discussion of this, so that people know what's happening. Now, the time is not our ally here, I get that, especially as we're going into the holiday season. But whether this is via action of the council or via administrative action, as Alex just outlined, I think that there needs to be as much heads up to the community as possible, and an opportunity for people to process this just like we've processed it in real time this evening.
Can we put it in the communicator? I mean, that would be the fastest way to get it out.
That might be after January by the time.
That'll be out.
Yeah.
I'm guessing with being Facebook Live, it might already be going around.
Yep.
There's a good chance of that, I would agree. Although I'm convinced that this is an unrelated factor, I'm going to ask the question because I anticipate somebody's going to ask the question of us. Everything that we've talked about in this pass-through and the financial impact on folks. I can hear somebody asking the question, well, if you guys just wouldn't have built that city hall, you would have had the money to be able to withstand this, and we would have been okay. It seems to me like this is totally unrelated to that, but you want to verify that for the record, as we lawyers like to say, Alex?
Correct. Yeah, I mean, the costs for City Hall were spread across all of the utilities, so that portion of the bond issue is not even falling explicitly on the electric utility. And what was that piece? I believe, those payments are, that is basically a $300,000 payment in relation to a $6 million revenue shortfall caused by this pass-through, caused by the transmission charges. So without that, it wouldn't have changed it wouldn't have changed the calculus in any way, shape, or form, because it is a very minor piece to the overall picture.
And whatever the nomenclature is going to be that we're going to use to reflect this, if it's going to be reflected on the bill, walk me through, if you can, real briefly, how it's advantageous for us to look at this as a January analysis rather than a summer analysis?
So starting going forward after this year, we'll no longer have that I&M true-up that comes at the end of June. So the only thing that's ever going to change in your wholesale power rate will be this PJM charge from now for the next 8-9 years, while we still have, the Wolverine agreements in place. The rest of it is all set, so this will be the only thing that changes, and it changes annually every January. So essentially, why we had always waited till the middle of the year was to capture the true-up piece from I&M. Now, since the only thing that's changes in January, we can make those adjustments in January and, put it in place in January and be good for the rest of the year, instead of, having this window of the PJM rates may go up, but we're waiting 6 months because we want to be able to capture anything that happens with I&M.
And that information that would be captured in January, does that fall into the category of what you described a couple minutes ago, which pursuant to state law could either be implemented as part of the rates that are paid by individuals and businesses by action of the council, or administratively under the flexibility that the law affords?
Correct, yes. The transmission charges as a piece of your overall wholesale power costs, would be something that an automatic pass-through calculation like this can take care of, however the city wants to actually implement it.
And if, under the scenario where we're looking at this in January, if it's going to be done by action of the council, would the council every year have to vote in order to solidify what that number is and what the impact is?
I mean, you wouldn't necessarily need to vote.
Let me ask the question a different way. If we stick with the system of council approval, is there a way that at the time that a normal rate increase analysis takes place, that can be baked into that process so that it's anticipated? Or, because when you say it's going to be looked at every January and that we're going to capture the real numbers, that feels to me then like we would be voting on that every year.
Certainly we could. I think kind of going back to how things were for the last couple of years, leading up to the change to Wolverine, we had always done this pass-through calculation, but the utilities and the administration, in the last couple of years, knowing that we had changes on board, the changes that would have been needed to the pass-through rate were relatively small, and were, the decision was made not to do anything about them. So, we could have that scenario going forward where there would be a year or two where you wouldn't actually take any action, but.
So as you project your cash balance, and you anticipate that so that you have some flexibility to be able to absorb that charge if it's not.
Yeah, I mean, yes, if the calculation suggests that the change needed is very minor, then we kind of go to step 2 of the process and see, okay, would that actually, affect the utility or cause issues?
And conceivably, they could drop.
Right.
Yeah.
When we
And
come to
then-
the council.
That was going to be my next question,
When
that
you do
it's,
winter-
there's a
winter,
teeter-totter
winter.
effect to it.
Yeah, and so, it would be coming back, if any time that we're going to actually make an adjustment to it. So yes, that would become a, more or less an annual thing unless the rates didn't change enough to warrant changes.
Any other good news to share with us, gentlemen?
We wished.
I think so.
Folks, do we have any other questions at this point?
Just one quick.
Famous last words. Go ahead, Mrs. Volker.
So,
Kid
just
is
to
a
follow up on your line of questioning, did we, in the past, when we had the tracker, which we don't have anymore, but did the council take action on it every year, or was it just adjusted?
So originally, the tracker adjusted throughout the year
Okay.
and led to some wildly fluctuating monthly bills
Okay.
that our citizens,
Right.
would complain to us about. It was driving them crazy. It's hard for them to budget. And so that's why we went to a more of a annualized kind of process. And most of it, I think more often than not, the city absorbed, the utility absorbed some of the, their smaller pass-through.
But we didn't vote on it. When it was that system,
Typically rates, but we did bring it to your attention.
okay,
Wasn't really until we left the IURC, was it, that we
really started paying attention,
started to vote?
yeah. We voted on the rates, but not
We
on
would set
this-
base
not on
rates and
this
then-
Right.
pass-through. So that kind of begs, I mean, we don't have to vote on this pass-through adjustment every year if we don't want to. Right?
It was the council's prerogative
Right.
at the time that we bring forward, and the council wanted to be involved in it, so that's why we are here.
Yeah. Well, it's good we're involved. For that. All right, I'm done.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Any other questions, folks? Then thank you. Undoubtedly, there are going to be some additional conversations that we're going to have. We appreciate your patience, with us as we've worked through this. And again, please don't mistake any of the angst that you feel from us as being directed at you. It sounds like it's very reflective of what you've gone through as individuals yourself, so hopefully it felt somewhat familiar, but please don't take it personally. So we've identified, it seems to me, some additional items of information that we're going to look into, and as you can flesh some of that out, if you can provide that to us, great. And we'll continue the conversation about where we go from here. But we appreciate your time and the information that you've shared this evening. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn this informational session of the council. Thank you, folks.